What's going on, y'all? I've been thinking about something lately. Why is it that I can remember an embarrassing moment from 10 years ago, but forget about God's faithfulness from 6 months ago? Maybe I'm not the only one. It seems like we have a remarkable ability to remember our fears and a remarkable tendency to forget God's faithfulness. And I've noticed that whenever a new challenge shows up, my first instinct is to wonder if everything is going to be okay. Will God provide? Will He make a way? Will I have enough? Will this work out? And it's amazing how quickly fear can make us forget all the ways that God has already carried us. And I think that's why God has often told his people to remember so often. Throughout scripture, God continually says, remember, remember Egypt, remember the wilderness, remember the Red Sea, remember what I have done, remember why he repeated that so many times. Surely they would forget, right? But then I look at my own life and I realize that I do the same thing. God answers a prayer and I rejoice. Then 6 months later, a different problem appears and I act as though he hasn't been faithful before. Maybe faith has as much to do with remembering as it does with believing. And I've started looking back over my own life. There have been doors that I desperately wanted to walk through that never opened. At the time, I thought God was withholding some good things from me. Now I can see he was protecting me. There have been seasons where I thought that I had reached the end of what I could endure, and somehow God carried me through them even more. Not always the way that I expected, but faithfully. And looking back, I can see his fingerprints in places that I completely missed while I was living them. And I think that's true more often than we realize. God is working quietly while we're looking for something dramatic. And I've also noticed that gratitude, it changes my memory. When I intentionally thank God for what he's already done, my fear begins to lose its grip. Not because the problems disappeared, but because my perspective changed. And instead of seeing only what's missing, I begin seeing what's already been given to me: breath, family, forgiveness, another sunrise to enjoy, another opportunity to love, another day to walk with Christ. Those aren't small things, they're miracles we become familiar with. And familiarity has a way of breeding contempt and forgetting wonder in our lives. And I've learned that remembering, it isn't pretending that life has always been easy. It's just simply choosing not to ignore God's faithfulness in the middle of all of it. And some of my hardest years have also become some of the clearest evidence of God's presence in my life. And it's not because the pain wasn't real, it was, but it was because that he never abandoned me inside of it. There are moments that I still don't understand, prayers that seem unanswered, questions that remain. Remembering doesn't erase those things. It simply reminds me that uncertainty has never been my whole story. God has been faithful before, he will be faithful again. Not because I deserve it, but because that's who he is. And I've been thinking about the Israelites after crossing the Jordan River. God told them to stack 12 stones together, not because the stones had power, but because the people forget. He wanted future generations to ask, what do those stones mean? And the answer would always point to his faithfulness. And I've wondered, what are the stones in my own life? What moments had God given me that I should never forget? The unexpected provision, the relationship he restored, the strength that he gave when I thought I had nothing left, the peace that arrived before the circumstances changed. Maybe I need to revisit those moments more often because memory strengthens trust and trust produces peace. So I'm beginning to think that's why worship is filled with remembrance. We remember the cross, we remember the empty tomb, we remember God's promises, not because he has forgotten them, but because we have. Maybe today, instead of asking God, where are you? Just take a moment and ask, where have you already been faithful to me? And you might discover that the evidence of his goodness has been surrounding you all along. And if he has carried you this far, you can trust him with whatever comes next, because the God who was faithful yesterday, the God who was faithful in the Red Sea, in the moments of almost being captured again by Egypt, is the same God you'll meet tomorrow. And remembering that just might be the courage that you need to keep taking that next step. Remember that God is faithful, and he's been here a lot longer than you and me ever will be. So you can trust him even with the small stuff and even with the big stuff. And until next time, man, much love. Peace.